Imagine, living with a dark secret for 4 years. That's what Virginia McCullough did after murdering her parents in their Essex home.
Wow.
We've got court documents and news reports about this whole thing. And today our mission is to really kind of break down this complex story.
Yeah.
How did a regular family get caught up in this web of lies and financial abuse and, ultimately this violence?
Yeah, it's a case that really makes you think about like what you think you know about families and people you know.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Mm.
So let's start with the victims here. John and Lois McCullough.
Okay.
John was a retired lecturer. He taught business studies, and Lois was a homemaker.
Mm-hmm.
They were both in their 70s and dealing with health challenges.
Yeah.
And so they relied a lot on their daughter, Virginia, for support.
It's just striking how vulnerable they were. John was managing things like hypertension, diabetes, and a bunch of other issues. And Lois, she had agoraphobia and OCD, which made her even more reliant on their daughter.
Yeah, so they're navigating getting older and needing help.
Yeah.
It's just tragic that they put their trust in the wrong person.
Yeah, and that's where Virginia's deceit comes in. She built this whole persona of being an artist,
Right.
claiming this would, bring financial stability to the family.
But she wasn't an artist at all. Behind the scenes, she was building up massive credit card debt, even forging letters to hide what she was doing. She would make up stories about financial scams to explain why they were losing money.
Classic financial abuse and manipulation.
Yeah.
You see this a lot with abusers taking advantage of how isolated and dependent their victims are, slowly taking away their money.
It's a pattern of control.
It is.
The court documents show she racked up almost 60,000 pounds in debt by the time of the murders. And her siblings have said that she's always been a compulsive liar. Like she could never separate truth from fiction.
That's important to think about. To understand why she did what she did, we have to look at her, her psychology, what was motivating her.
Well, and her actions were definitely calculated. The murders were planned out. It's chilling. Starting in March of 2019, she's stockpiling all these prescription drugs. She even uses her dad as a test subject.
Oh my
to
God.
figure out the right dosage. It's horrifying.
Yeah, it shows a level of detachment and manipulation. You have to think about the trust John McCullough had in his daughter and how badly that was betrayed.
In May of that year, she goes and buys a knife and tools to crush up pills.
Wow.
This shows just how planned out these murders were.
Yeah, she was setting the stage for something awful.
Yeah. Then on June 17th, she makes this deadly cocktail of drugs for her parents. She puts her dad's medicine in an alcoholic drink to make sure he takes a fatal dose.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Lois didn't drink alcohol.
Oh, wow.
So she didn't consume a lethal amount.
That's a small mercy, but it just led to an even more horrible act.
Right. The next morning, Virginia finds her dad dead.
Mm-hmm.
Panic sets in, and she's terrified her mom will figure out what really happened. So she attacks Lois, beating and stabbing her while she's in bed listening to the radio.
I can't even imagine that.
It's just brutal.
The brutality is shocking. What could push someone to do something like that? Was it just panic? A way to hide what she did? Or something darker?
Whatever the reason, the aftermath is hard to even hear about.
It's a nightmare.
Virginia builds this makeshift tomb for her dad in his study using breeze blocks and sleeping bags. Her mom's body, she wraps it in the sleeping bag and hides it in a wardrobe upstairs.
To think about the psychological impact of living in that house for 4 years.
Yeah.
Surrounded by that evidence.
It's unbelievable.
It's like she completely separated herself from what she'd done. This refers to a psychological defense mechanism where someone separates conflicting thoughts or emotions, often to cope with trauma or guilt.
Yeah, and she went to extreme lengths to keep up this act.
Well, the cover-up was elaborate. It shows just how capable she was of deceiving people.
She told family and doctors these elaborate lies, saying her parents were on a long trip, or that they were sick or had moved away.
She even sent gifts and messages pretending to be her parents just to keep up the lie.
It's crazy what people will do to keep up a facade like that, even after something so horrible.
It really is. And the pandemic made it easier for her.
Oh, yeah.
With all the restrictions and less social contact, it was easier for her to keep people at a distance.
For 4 years, she lived this lie, collecting their pensions, gambling away their money, and selling off their things.
It was all bound to fall apart at some point.
And it did, thanks to their doctor.
A vigilant GP.
Yeah. Their attention to detail is what exposed Virginia's whole scheme.
It shows how important it is to pay attention, even in routine medical care.
The McCullough's GP started getting worried. John missed picking up a regular prescription, and their daughter Virginia had canceled several appointments for them. Those were red flags.
Missing appointments and changes in communication, those are big warning signs. The GP made the right call, contacting the safeguarding team at Essex County Council.
Yeah, and the council got the police involved, who started treating it like a missing persons case. When officers talked to Virginia, she told them her parents were traveling and would be back in October. But her story didn't add up.
The holes in her story and the fact that nobody had heard from the McCulloughs themselves, that raised suspicions. They needed to investigate further.
On September 15th, 2023, police searched the McCullough house. What they found was a nightmare.
It was a shock to the whole community. Finding those bodies hidden like that, it makes you realize how much darkness can hide beneath the surface of everyday life.
And then things take another crazy turn. When Virginia is arrested, she confesses right away.
But her confession was strange.
Yeah.
She told the officers to cheer up and said, at least you caught the bad guy. It's so jarring, the seriousness of her crimes and then her flippant attitude.
She even joked about her mother's murder,
Oh my.
comparing it to someone badly playing the xylophone.
How can someone be so detached? What's one of the big questions in this case. Was this her way of coping with what she did? Or was it a sign of something more disturbing? All of this became really important in her trial, which started in October of 2024.
The prosecution painted Virginia as a manipulative and cold-blooded killer driven by greed and wanting to keep up her fake life.
They focused on her financial schemes, how she planned the murders, and how callously she covered it all up. It pointed to a carefully thought-out plan carried out with a chilling efficiency.
The defense, though, they argued that Virginia was the one taking care of her parents, pointing out their health problems and suggesting she got overwhelmed.
Right.
They also mentioned her paranoia and autism diagnosis, suggesting those could have played a role.
It's complicated, the relationship between mental health and criminal responsibility. The court had to consider the crimes along with her mental state. It's tricky and raises important ethical and legal questions.
In the end, the judge didn't believe Virginia's claims of parental abuse, which her siblings denied. He called her actions a gross violation of trust and sentenced her to life in prison with a minimum of 36 years.
A sentence that fits the crimes but still leaves open the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
It recognizes how serious her actions were, while still allowing for the chance of rehabilitation and reintegration back into society.
The victim's family released a statement talking about their devastation and the pain they're going through. Their words really showed the lasting impact of Virginia's actions.
It reminds us that behind all the headlines and legal stuff, there are real people whose lives have been shattered.
Right.
This horrible event affects families, communities, and even those involved in the investigation and legal process.
This deep dive into the McCullough case has taken us to some dark places, exposing how fragile family bonds can be and just how deeply people can deceive.
It's a story that makes you question everything you think you know about people. It forces us to look at the nature of evil, how complex mental health is, and how important it is to protect vulnerable people.
Yeah, beyond the horror and tragedy, are there lessons we can learn from this? About recognizing signs of abuse, being open in our families, and supporting those who are struggling.
Absolutely. The McCullough case shows us how, even in families, darkness can take hold. We need to be able to spot those red flags and understand how abusers control their victims.
Looking back, what were the biggest red flags? What should people be watching out for in their own lives?
Financial manipulation is usually a sign that something's wrong. Virginia taking control of her parents' money, the faith letters, the stories about scams, those were huge warning signs.
You mentioned earlier that her siblings said she was a compulsive liar.
Right.
It seems like lying was a big part of how she operated.
Exactly. You need to pay attention to patterns of behavior. Is someone always lying? Are they trying to isolate or control the people they're close to? Those are serious signs that shouldn't be ignored.
It's a scary reminder that we have to trust our gut. If something feels wrong, if someone's acting out of character, you need to pay attention.
It's also important to check in on your loved ones, especially older people, people with health issues, or those who are isolated. Just a call, a visit, a little concern, those things can make a big difference.
They can help break through the isolation that abusers create around their victims.
No.
It's about staying connected.
Exactly. And if you think someone is being abused, don't wait to get help. Call the police, a domestic violence hotline, or a group that specializes in elder abuse. There are resources out there.
We don't have to go through these things alone. There are people who want to help.
And remember that victims of abuse often feel trapped and ashamed. Talking to them with empathy, being patient, and listening without judgment is crucial.
Creating that safe space for them to speak up can be the first step to breaking free from abuse.
This deep dive into the Virginia McCullough case has been a harsh look at what can happen within families. It's a story that forces us to face some hard truths and be vigilant about protecting ourselves and the people we love.
It shows how important it is to be aware, educated, and proactive in our support.
Yes.
By understanding how abuse and manipulation work, we can be better prepared to spot the warning signs and step in when we need to.
And remember, knowledge is power. I really encourage our listeners to learn more about financial abuse, coercive control, and the psychology of families.
Thank you for guiding us through this tough but important conversation.
You're welcome.
And to our listeners, please take this knowledge with you, be aware, be vigilant, and be there for anyone who might need help. Even in the darkest times, there's always hope, and help is out there.
Absolutely. It was a house of cards just waiting to fall apart.
And it did, all because of a concerned GP.
Yeah, their vigilance really set things in motion and revealed Virginia's deception.
It shows how important it is for doctors to be observant and follow up, even with routine care.
Definitely.
So the McCullough's GP had been getting more and more worried. John hadn't picked up his regular prescription, and Virginia kept canceling their appointments.
Yeah.
Those were red flags that the GP couldn't ignore.
Those missed appointments and the changes in how Virginia was communicating, those were huge warning signs. The GP did the right thing, contacting the safeguarding team at Essex County Council.
And the council then alerted the police, who initially treated it as a missing persons case.
Right.
When the officers questioned Virginia, she said her parents were on a trip and would be back in October. But her story just didn't add up.
The inconsistencies and the fact that no one had actually heard from the McCulloughs themselves, that's what made them suspicious. They needed to investigate more.
So on September 15th, 2023, police got a search warrant for the McCullough house, and what they found inside was beyond their worst nightmares.
It was awful. The discovery of the bodies hidden the way they were, it really shook the community. It just shows how darkness can be hidden in plain sight.
And then the story gets even more disturbing. When they arrested Virginia, she confessed to the murders right away.
But she confessed in a really strange way.
Yeah.
She told the officers to cheer up and said, "At least you caught the bad guy." It's so weird, you know? The seriousness of what she'd done and then this flippant attitude.
She even made a joke about killing her mother,
Oh, wow.
comparing it to someone playing the xylophone badly.
Wow. It's hard to understand how someone can be so detached. Was that her way of dealing with it? Or was it something more? It's one of the biggest questions in this whole case, and it became a central part of her trial, which started in October 2024.
Right. The prosecution presented Virginia as a cold and calculating killer, motivated by greed and wanting to hold on to her fake life.
They really built a strong case, focusing on her financial manipulations, how she planned out the murders, and how cold she was in covering it up. It all points to a carefully planned out crime.
The defense, though, argued that Virginia was her parents' primary caregiver. They talked about their health problems and suggested that she was overwhelmed by it all.
Okay.
They also brought up her diagnoses of paranoia and autism as possible factors.
It's good. Mental state. It's a tough thing to balance, and it brings up important questions about ethics and the law.
The judge ultimately didn't believe Virginia's claims that her parents abused her, which her siblings denied too. He called her actions a gross violation of trust and sentenced her to life in prison with a minimum of 36 years.
That's a sentence that fits the crimes, but it also allows for parole later on. It recognizes how serious what she did was, but it doesn't rule out the possibility of rehabilitation and her returning to society.
The victim's family made a statement talking about their grief and the pain they're going through. It really showed how much Virginia's actions affected them.
It's a reminder that beyond the news and the legal stuff, real people's lives have been changed forever by this.
Yeah.
This terrible event has affected families, communities, and everyone involved in the investigation and the legal process.
Yeah, it really shows that even within a family, things can go really dark, and it forces us to see those warning signs and understand how abusers get control over their victims.
Looking back at this case, what were the biggest red flags like? What should people be watching out for?
Well, financial manipulation is often a big sign that something's wrong. Virginia controlling her parents' finances, the forged letters, the lies about scams, those are all huge red flags.
And her siblings saying she was a compulsive liar.
Yeah.
It seems like deception was a major part of her personality.
Exactly. You got to pay attention to patterns of behavior. Is someone constantly lying? Are they trying to cut people off from their loved ones? Those are serious things, and you can't ignore them.
It's scary. It reminds us that we have to trust our gut. If something feels off, if someone's not acting like themselves, pay attention. You also have to check in on the people you care about, especially older folks, people with health problems, or people who are isolated. Just a call, a visit showing that you care, those things can make a difference.
That can help break through the isolation that abusers create, right? It's about
Ru-
staying connected.
Exactly. And if you think someone might be abused, don't hesitate to get help. Call the police or a domestic violence hotline or a group that helps older people. There are resources out there.
You don't have to go through this alone. There are people who want to help.
And remember, victims of abuse often feel ashamed and trapped. It's so important to talk to them with kindness, patience, and to listen without judging.
Creating that safe space for them to open up can be the first step to breaking free.
This whole deep dive into the Virginia McCullough case has been a tough look at what can happen inside families. It forces us to face some uncomfortable truths and to really be careful about protecting ourselves and the people we love.
It highlights how important it is to be aware, to learn, and to be proactive in supporting each other. By understanding abuse and manipulation, we can better spot the warning signs and step in when we need to.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is power. I encourage everyone listening to really dig into these topics, learn about financial abuse, coercive control, and the psychology of families.
Thank you for helping us through this tough conversation.
Of course.
And to everyone listening, please take this with you. Be aware, be vigilant, and be there for anyone who might need help. Because even in the darkest times, there's always hope and help is out there.